What were you saying earlier, Vincent, about how general Western culture is now being really focused on youth? It's youth centered. So now combine that with the postmodernist idea of breaking down all these different structures, and then combine that with nefarious members of the village who then cozy up to the children online, and those are the groomers. So that's why we're seeing stories like of younger trans people who are, and younger gay people and just kids in general, but especially within the trans circles, you're seeing these older people who are now saying like, well, I'm non-binary. Just any man or woman can just say, well, I'm non-binary, and then that suddenly gives them like, a special halo around them with like special like fairy dust around them that's like, hey, I'm now a safe, cool person who's, woke and is now who believes what you believe, and you're so smart and so mature for your age because you can see that. And so we see these predators, the kids, they have no idea who their real friends are. And part of that, I think, is because they're literally naive and they're sheltered. And then they're online in a world that's not naive or sheltered at all. And it's really easy to disguise as, like I'm sure you saw that article, right? About the porn, like parents were finding like hardcore porn and grooming materials on like a 13-year-old's phone, all because she got involved in the trans identity, and she had these older friends that were showing her these materials, and they had been groomed by even older adults. And it's just kind of this chain reaction. So I guess it's a bigger question of like, what do we actually do about technology? What do we do about the internet? I think we should save that whole thing for another episode, because that's I think a really important question. But that's what a lot of parents have to contend with. Like, that's why a lot of advice that I've heard is, if possible, limit the internet, just limit their access to the internet, get them involved in real life activities, and limit the internet use, limit the social media, because you have more than a village on there, and you can't possibly distinguish every single degenerate that would normally be kind of hiding in the shadows, like on a street corner or clustered in a bar together, or whatever, in their own house, doing whatever they're doing. You can't possibly know that online.
I'm going to tell you, just to remind everyone, I actually don't have children. I'm 48, and I'm married quite late in life, and my wife and I chose not to have children. So maybe I have a different perspective, but I'm going to tell you, in my opinion, whatever you think you can do to stop your 14-year-old, okay, obviously you can control and should control your 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old, absolutely, from the internet. And I know there's a lot of material out there about this, so that's been quite well established. I can tell you a lot of really scary things about cyberbullying. But unfortunately, when you research cyberbullying, you find out that the apps that exist to monitor and control cyberbullying are not downloaded by parents, by teachers, and by kids themselves. So there's some really good stuff in that area. Having said that, you have to prepare, going back to what you said earlier, you have to prepare them psychologically, morally, to deal with the fact that there are predators and opportunists in the world. At the end of the day, it's whether they're 12 years old or whether they're 18 years old. The world is full of predators and opportunists. So if you're young and listening to this, please don't freak out, because for every predator and opportunist, there are 50 totally normal and quite healthy people. So the problem is, it only takes one predator or opportunist to cause a lot of damage. So what I'm saying is, in my research that I've had to do and my own life experiences, the fact that the actual problem in those bad environments, whether they're online or whether they're the pub, as I said earlier, Laura, was if there was no Rihanna in my life, in the pub that I was going to when I was 15 years old, who knows where I'd be now? I might have ended up on drugs. I might be dead. Okay. So what I'm saying is adults have to stand up and they have to do something and have to say something and they have to get together and form an organization like GenSpect. I'm a bit in love with GenSpect right now today, so give me a break, okay? But there's a big community of us in regards to gender questioning under psychology. There's a huge and growing community of us that are organizing. And my own horn for a second or two here. I saw these problems coming. I didn't realize transitioning was going to be a problem, but I did see there were major postmodernist problems coming down the pipeline. So that's why I chose to do a psychology degree, a counseling psychology degree specifically, at the age of 46, because someone has to do something. You can't just sit and moan about it and reshare tweets on the internet about it. And on a I suppose that's more on the macro scale. On the micro scale, parents, you need to educate yourselves. You can't just deny that this world exists. You can't deny that an 11-year-old can see the most graphic and violent porn at the touch of a few clicks on their phone, because you haven't installed software that stops that happening. You didn't install the software. The child will go wherever life takes the child. The growing vine will grow on anything it finds. So yes, some vines grow on trees that can't handle the vine, and the vine actually kills the tree, and then both of them collapse. By the way, if this is not something you've ever heard of before, maybe it's something that happens in Africa, I'm not sure, but there's a specific type of creeper in South Africa that becomes massive because it occupies massive trees, but it ultimately kills the tree, and then the two of them fall over, and they often cause quite a lot of damage. They can fall on houses and stuff if you haven't managed it. But the point I'm making is that the child is looking for answers. The child is looking for resources, ways to survive, essentially. And if you leave the doors all open, it's going to find whatever is available. So take the responsibility and do something about what your let's say child, let's say under 13, is exposed to. But honestly, when you start getting around 12, 13, you might as well do some education. And I'm not saying whip out the postmodernist sex education book, because those are usually ridiculous and they condone types of behavior that is not pro-social, and it's always at the expense of someone else, which is fundamentally my problem with a lot of these things. But the point I wanted to, and I wrote it down because I want to underline it for all of us, is there's responsibility that has to happen on all ends. Laura, you and I, as people who have been and are going through gender identity crisis or mental health crisis, we instinctively start realizing that we do have to take responsibility. But at the same time, if the adults in our environment are conceding that responsibility to the internet or to the TV or to a news channel or whatever it is, then it's no surprise that you wake up one day and you don't know who this person is that lives in your house. So I don't need to sound insensitive. Of course, there are other things that can happen here. We were talking earlier about the nature-nurture thing. Nature can sometimes introduce problems that no one could have foreseen. So of course, there's nuance to what I'm saying, but I don't think, and obviously I don't think this, because otherwise I wouldn't have stopped my career and chosen to study at the age of 46. I don't think there's enough people yet taking responsibility for the direction that Western culture is going in. And until there's enough of us taking that responsibility, the stuff will keep escalating, and it'll morph. We might fix one problem, but it'll morph into another problem.
Well, I guess that kind of reminds me of the other problem, is that the parents feel like they don't have control. Now, I'm talking about on a larger scale. They feel like they are not being listened to, you know? So there are parents that are speaking up, and organizing, but they're not being listened to. And why is that? You know, who are they trying to convince, right? These other people who have positioned themselves in the role of the mentor.
Who's benefiting?
Yeah, who's benefiting?
You said it earlier.
Yeah, who's benefiting from it? So there, you know, schools are, so I'm talking K through 12 schools are implementing techniques. Now, where are they getting those ideas from? Higher education, right? So then who is putting these ideas into higher education? It's the postmodernist stuff again. As I keep learning more and more about this, it all keeps coming back to that. Because there's a deconstruction of boundaries. So that's what postmodernism is. And queering,
yeah.
To queer something is to break its boundaries down. So they want to break down the boundaries because kids, in their mind, you know, it's natural for them to break down boundaries. That's part of development. So they think they're breaking some like radical boundaries by dyeing I'm calling myself out as I say this, like, okay, dyeing your hair a different color and like dressing androgynously and smoking, you know, weed or even harder drugs or skipping school or whatever, right? So that seems like you're breaking down boundaries, or that the whole system is fucked anyway. So why, you know, even play into it at all? Why even go to school? Like, well, what's the point of that? Like, I've wanted to not go to college every year of the 7 years that I was there. Somehow I have managed to almost get through it, but I wanted to give up on that because I'm just like, what is the point of any of this? You know, it's the nihilism. So I guess like the parents aren't really being listened to. So I guess I actually had a lawyer tell me, a lawyer that I did an amicus brief, or not amicus, it's pronounced amicus, like whatever, brief, which means friend of the court. So I and some other detransitioners had our stories written up by a lawyer, and we gave them to a couple cases. And this lawyer told me that the biggest issue that's going to help us is parental rights. You know, it's not as much the medical stuff, but like, well, that, you know, but parental rights is the big thing that's going to tip this cultural movement, because parents are getting silenced in favor of what pop culture, you know, says is most appropriate. And by pop culture, I mean like random people on YouTube and making podcasts and people who have their own agendas, you know, and who is benefiting from those people. Some of them are predatory people. You know, what do they have to gain? How did we say it before? When we were talking before this, we were saying who is benefiting from this obsession with children's sex and gender identity and sexuality. Certainly people who want to view children as having sexual autonomy to the point where they have a peer level relationship with an adult. So people who view children as sexually accessible and are then giving them tools to access porn, fetish material, sex and gender, and all these different identities, and then not listen to their parents and not listen to any traditional wisdom whatsoever. The groomers, right? So the people who stand to corral children into this a very adult world that they're not prepared for. So that's one issue, is the parents who are speaking up are being silenced. And that's another issue. There's one more thing I wanted to go back to also, which was, the idea of we've tried to create this safe space. So now we have this paradox where it's the safest possible place, safe to the point where there's too much security and there's not enough activity going on that would actually allow growth within the homes, within these bedrooms. But then within the bedrooms are the deadliest tools of all, the smartphones and the laptops that then give access to all of the horrors, but it still feels like it's from a safe distance because sure, I watched like intense graphic porn from the time that I was 14, but I'm still, getting my laundry done and having the food and being protected and, but it's like how there's not much distance between that and then downloading Grindr, Tinder, going on Craigslist when I was 16 and looking to have sex with strangers and do drugs and have sex with strangers, which I did a lot more times than I'm comfortable with having done, and it was extremely destructive to me. And and then people are like, oh well, children should, adolescents and teens should explore sexually, and like that's what I was thinking. I was like, well, I know better than this. Like I am, perfectly sexually mature, and I can have sex or I can smoke crack or the certain things that I did. In reality, though, I'm a very like emotionally sick person, young person, who doesn't have any sense of boundaries, who doesn't have any sense of any direction in life. And then I'm going off to, I know this sounds so depressing, but then going off to like have sex and do hard drugs with like strangers. Very, I was actually fortunate that I kind of didn't experience, like direct trauma from any of that or like assault or anything, but it was right around the corner, and it was in the periphery of all these things. So it wasn't really this kind of postmodernist idea of like sexual liberation, because like how liberating is it? Yeah, it wasn't. It was more like a desperation or a boredom or a listlessness or just like I literally don't know what I'm doing. So again, as I said before, hold on, let me just finish this. It's like I said before, seeking out. I went into the jungle deliberately because I was like, I just need to do something. But then that something was extremely destructive, dangerous behavior because I didn't have another outlet for anything, for energy, love, attachment, friendship, real, because the attachments that I had to these people, I mean, how real were they? How real was the relationship? My real first boyfriend, as I said at the time, who was like a 47-year-old and I was like 21 and he was 47 and he was a crack addict. And our relationship was based on just smoking crack together and watching TV. Like how real was that attachment? Was that a real friend to me? It felt like it because I didn't have anything else at the time, What were you going to say, Vincent? Sorry, that was a very... kind of intense.
I'm just gonna remind everyone, Laura and I committed to this, and this is it. This is the conversation. There's things that I've said on this podcast and to get into my cohort at in my studies that I never thought I'd say to anyone. But this is the thing: is if you recognize that there's a problem with authenticity and meaning and purpose in our society, you can't then come on and focus on the commodification of a podcast or of my writings or of my studies or whatever it is. So what I hope everyone appreciates here is that we're being authentic. Being human is a messy business. And if you're young and listening to this, you better hold on because it's going to get very interesting. But the point I wanted to make, and just as you were talking, I thought about it this way. You said you were trying to get over something, and you couldn't really answer that question. You were like, I was doing drugs and because I was trying to get over something. I wonder about that because part of me thinks, I wonder if once you remove all the boundaries and you take away all the restrictions from an adolescent or from any human actually, but let's talk about adolescents specifically, maybe nature takes over and nature says, right, well, historically, you could be dead by the time you're 30. If you look at the last 100,000 years of human history. So I wonder if it's not so much of us trying to work through something and trying to get through something and trying to get over something, and or maybe it's just this default setting that humans revert to when things are when so the thought that I had was, what happens when there's no cost to something? When there's no cost to your behavior, that removes the boundaries. This is what the postmodernists want, because they think that they can re-engineer society once we remove the costs. But what I think you and I have experienced is when you remove the cost from this kind of behavior, all hell breaks loose, actually. So it's a fine balance. And I'm not saying I have all the answers, but it's a fine balance of having some boundaries, but also giving the adolescent something to do, like literally just something to do. Go learn, go do something. Because if you look at our, our society, how we try and structure things, it's right, you're going to go to school for so many years, then you're going to go to college for so many years, then you're going to go get a job for so many years, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the one little thing I'll add in there, one of the big mistakes that I think we've been doing for the last 50 years or so is those plans end when we hit 60. And I think that's another problem we can talk about in another podcast. But the problem of the second half of life, where society has no plan for people after 60. And when you have someone like me who intends to live to 100, society isn't friendly to the man or the person who's learned a lot in life and now wants to share that with his community, to us being able to do that. So I think there's that. The adolescents are being abandoned to a world that we assume is safe, but at the same time, you've got people in midlife who are corralled into retirement prematurely, actually. I mean, if you said to me, I'm supposed to retire in, 60 or 65, that's like round the corner. I'm 48 years old. I ain't retiring. I'm not going anywhere until I can't speak anymore.
I mean, we were talking about that earlier too, how, because I just turned 25 and I'm going to graduate from college, after being in college for 7 years. And I'm like, now what? It's kind of overwhelming. Because the whole idea, like, we're supposed to go through these developmental stages and it's all planned out. I mean, I just think about how planned out my life was when I was a child, compared to then how completely chaotic it got as a teenager. And then how chaotic it's been, as a young adult. It's kind of like, well, it's like we're not providing the right guidance. We're just going through the motions of the stages of development, but not really giving them the proper respect that they're due. Cause like, okay, we'll have a party for you when you're 16 or whatever, or, now you're going to high school. So we'll have a graduation party, like a middle school graduation party to high school, or high school to college. It's like we're trying to mark these milestones, but what are we really doing different? Because it seems like either there's too much expectation. Like for me, when I went to middle school, it was like an extremely abrupt change from 5th to 6th grade. And I was really no different from 5th to 6th grade because I had already started puberty. But for me, that's when I started spiraling out of control, because it was too abrupt of a transition, because we're going from 5th graders where we're all being, celebrated and childlike and everything seems safe and loving, to suddenly now we're in middle school and now you have to prepare for what? High school. So they're not really preparing for real life challenges. They're not preparing you for the emotional disturbances and the social disturbances. What they were doing was preparing you to be able to conform to high school level coursework. That's what they were preparing for. So the fact that I started going into a deep social and emotional crisis when I entered 6th grade, the schools did nothing about that. And so it's like, what are we really preparing for? It's like, are we really guiding people, or are we just, I also feel like it's too polarized, and is unnuanced a word? There's not enough nuance to the polarization. So there's one half, I guess you could call it like the radical left, or, liberal side of things, that's like, we need to coddle everyone so much, we have to provide, like the socialist kind of attitude, and then apply that to development and meaning and growth. And then there's the extreme conservative side that's like, no, like, we don't need any of this. You have to do it all for yourself. And anything that happens to you is because of your own choices and your own failings, and you're just not morally pure enough or whatever. And that can happen on both sides. But there's just different blame shifting. But neither side is really properly preparing you, is the issue. Neither side is actually giving you a nuanced view that's going to help you navigate the ins and outs, the moments when it is your fault, and then the moment when it isn't. And so, if you have too many boundaries, the authoritarian kind of view, you're not going to have enough freedom or self-control. But if you have far too much freedom and far too much deconstruction, you're not going to have any boundaries to be able to even determine where meaning begins or ends. So I guess it feels like, in general, who's guarding us? It's a war between the political kind of talking heads that are like, our values are that we all need to, deal with our own selves. We have to deal with our own families. Like, it's not our fault if there's an economic crisis over here or there. We have to do what's best for us individually. And it's this individualistic stance of personal accountability versus like, no, we all need to take care of each other, from the other political side. So that's where you get this war of, now anyone who's saying anything moderate, as we're saying, or like reasonable, says, maybe we should allow teenagers the freedom to be able to walk around outside, and we don't have to carpool them everywhere. And they should have freedom to be able to, go to hang out with their friends at the mall, or limit their social media, or, limit their access to even sexuality materials or whatever. That's like, oh, you're some kind of conservative. Like, I don't know if I'm getting a bit off topic, but like a friend of mine, I told him, like, I'm kind of skeptical of the COVID. I don't believe in the COVID lockdowns, and I'm skeptical to that. And I am not like drinking, or like I'm voluntarily celibate because I'm working on some shit, and I'm not doing any drugs or any substances anymore for the same reason. And then the person was like, my friend was like, what? So you're becoming like a Catholic now? Like, you're like a conservative Catholic now? And I was like, no, I'm still an atheist.
Oh my God, that's hysterical.
Yeah. And now I don't know how much they were joking, but it's like, I guess me doing that questions their own kind of aimless values or aimless behavior that they're still doing, but like, I'm not, an authoritarian, or for saying like, oh, we need to have some boundaries on like giving children puberty blockers. And I'm also not like some radical person for saying like, maybe we should allow sex outside of marriage, or just something like that. Like, it's just, so I guess I'm just trying to get, sorry, what were you going to say?
No, there's something interesting about, and I'm going to bring back something you said previously, that, there's a couple of things intersecting here. So first of all, children are very smart nowadays. Okay, so we all know that, like, it's an anecdotal thing, but it's been shown in research as well. The IQ level has increased. So the chances are your children are smarter than you in statistically speaking. All right. Psychometrically speaking, let's put it that way, rather, to be more accurate. And then at the same time, humans are living longer, right? So the old schedule that we were on is starting to look a little bit irrelevant, all right? So we wait until such an age until something happens. Then we wait till another age till something happens. So what's happening is the rituals or the rites of passage that do exist might be slightly less relevant than they were 50 years ago. All right. So again, I'm not saying I know exactly what the solution is, but I think these are the things that we have to consider. The children are getting smarter. We're living longer. People want, in career design, people want life satisfaction. They want life quality rather than, 50 years working for one company. So all these things are intersecting in a way that I think a young person gets the signals from the outside world through that phone that's lying in their bedroom. They have access to the entire universe of knowledge, and they get all these signals, and none of those signals say you have to go and do something. You have to go and confront reality. You have to overcome nature. You have to challenge something, the status quo or politics or your own skills. You have to develop your own skills. So there's very little that I know this isn't a universal truth. Obviously, a lot of young people grow up with too many challenges thrown at them. In my restaurant, for example, that I had for many years here in South Africa, a lot of the kids were shuttled from one extramural activity to the next, and they would end up in counseling because they were exhausted, because they were drained at the age of 12. And I know that the schools run those kinds of programs because that's what they think they're doing. They're creating this. I'm going to use Nietzsche's term. Some people really believe they're creating Nietzsche's Übermensch. We're going to have this leadership class, and they'll be super successful, and they'll rule over everyone else. I know people don't lie awake at night thinking about it like that, but that's kind of what we're drawn to do. I think it's in human nature, So then, on the other hand, you've got longer lifespan, you've got smarter kids at a younger age, and then you've got this sort of, in many arenas, you've got this lack of structure. So along comes the trans lobby, right, Laura? You were talking about this earlier. Do you want to carry on?
Well, right. So the trans lobby comes along and they say, like, you have something special about you, and what that is, your source of pain. You have all these symptoms: anxiety, depression, body issues, you don't fit in, maybe you have a hard time making friends, or you just feel off in some way, or there feels like there's something missing or wrong. All of these symptoms that, really could be anything, literally to so many different things, a disorder, quote unquote, disorders, or even just situational stuff. And says, like, you have this special thing about you, and you can't be, you don't have to be ashamed of that. You need to accept that you are just supposed to be the opposite sex, or you are non-binary, which I actually feel like the trans thing, the opposite sex thing, is insidious in its own way of making you kind of discard your own natural bodily functions and maybe go through medical stuff. But I think the non-binary stuff is extremely insidious in its own way, because it's just so confusing, because it's saying, like, physical reality doesn't actually matter. It's saying it's a lie. You're lying to yourself that you're not a male or a female, or at least in many actual transsexual cases, like somewhere in between, that you can rationally accept that you have these characteristics, not just saying blanketly, like, well, I'm nothing, like, I don't have a gender. That's what I used to say. I didn't say non-binary. I said agender, because I was like, you know what? I'm agender. I'm against any of this genderedness, right? So I'm against any of the stereotypes, any of the norms, any of the customs. I don't conform to them. I just do my stuff. But I still had some idea that I was a female. So I had some rationale about me, but I still hated myself as myself, which happened to be a female. So I still got sucked into the transition, the medical trans stuff. But when you have a lot of people, they really, people are pretending and lying to them that they see them not as a male or a woman, a male or a female, a man or a woman, or a girl or a boy, or that their sexuality is fluid. How do you know what your sexuality is if you haven't actually done anything with anyone or had any life experience? So of course your sexuality is fluid. It's yet to be determined. But now we have like universities, it's just so frustrating. Like in my classes, they say like, pronouns, like we had to go through like a class respect kind of thing. And they were like, pronouns, that's a big one, like respect people's pronouns. And I guess it just, to me, I'm just like, does anyone really see this girl, this just obvious girl who just like calls herself non-binary? Does anyone really believe that they aren't a woman? Does anyone really believe that? Or are they just trying to be polite? But then it's like, what is it like politeness? Like it's deference, right? Or like, I don't know what the definition of politeness is, but like you're deferring to
But
what? To a lie, a delusion.
To a lie. Again, you see how the lies come up. I mean, we were talking about this earlier. Where's the authenticity in that? And I'm lying. I know you're lying. We're all lying. So actually nothing matters. So the lack of structure, the lack of any developmental process, the operative word being development, you're only developing if you're working towards something bigger, something larger. Otherwise, it's nihilism. And this is my sense, is that the queering of language around gender is effectively nihilism, and it effectively strips any hope of understanding what the real human drama really is about. If we accept that there's all this potential in each human being to create and destroy and to feel and to cry and to shout and to laugh, but this stuff seeks to smudge all that together so that it all becomes one non-binary entity, and I just rail against that. As much as I've experienced suffering and depression and pain, I would rather have that. Thank you very much.
Well, at least you have something like with the non-binary. Yeah, you have something. The non-binary label is just a mask. As you've said before, a veneer for male and female problems. And now people are saying like, you know what? Those are male and female problems. So in a way, like when you say I'm non-binary, you're saying, you know what? I don't want you've been having problems, whether it's actually because you're male or female, or how much of it is because of that or because of other stuff or whatever. But you're having problems. You are a male or a female. That comes with, I hate to break it to you guys, but males and females have problems. They have their own unique set of problems, and then they create and solve problems for each other interchangeably. Okay?
Exactly. So well said.
And so by saying non-binary, it's just like, I just don't want these problems, right? I don't want these problems. It's the same reason why I, would eat like just when I'm just miserable. I'm just like, time to go to the store at 11 p.m. and get a bunch of ice cream and a bunch of pretzels and a bunch of shit so I can eat away, and just pretend for a few hours or whatever that these problems aren't happening, So the non-binary that's why I think the non-binary is insidious, because at least when you label something as trans, you can kind of see that the person is specifically having an issue somewhat related to their body. So you have at least some knowledge. That's why I think the non-binary is just so nihilistic, and it's sad because it seems so freeing. Like when I just wrote an essay about this, about how androgynous fashion tricked me into being trans, because at first when I started calling myself genderqueer and just saying the word queer to me, it didn't really mean anything tangibly other than like, oh, I'm just kind of weird, I'm eccentric, I'm flamboyant. And now I feel some pride in, my weird outfits and my sense of humor and my passion and whatever, being different. I had pride in that originally, but then it became a couple years later a self-deprecating nihilistic thing that wasn't freeing at all. It was actually constricting, because I had constricted myself into being only this like weird, not only weird and different, but also weird, different, and not good enough somehow. Like my sex wasn't good enough. I wasn't good enough to be loved or accepted or wanted or whatever by myself or others. So then I started restricting myself into only that category. And then when you're only in that little category, well, you're trans, right? So like, what are you going to do? And then the only options sold to you for when you're in that mindset are you have to transition or you're going to kill yourself. And I was already suicidal anyway, even before I was trans. So of course I was suicidal. It wasn't just like some kind of like slogan I read online, like a lot of trans people will kill themselves. It's like, no, I'm already debating about it every day on my own. So then I read that, and then it's like, well, that's the reason why I'm so suicidal, So you're in
then you get given structure.
Yes.
Then you get the words you use, then you get sold this package. It's like the 12-step program of becoming trans.
Right.
And it's so bizarre how we're so fixated on queering and on postmodernist constructs, yet the trans package is very specific. This is how we will make you the opposite sex in many cases.
Mm-hmm. This is how you will live a new life. This is how you will be a new person.
Yes.
This is how people will now see you in a different way, the way that you want or the way you think you want other people to perceive you. So you get like a packaged and sold transcendence, and all you need to do is go to a clinic, say that you're fucking miserable, and get a free injection of a substance that you can then utilize to begin that process, which is exactly what I did.
Exactly. I would wonder if, you said we're going to help you be perceived as the opposite sex. But if you're not being perceived, period, then you being perceived as the opposite sex is just a dramatization of your circumstances. It's not fixing the actual problem. The problem is your ecology, your milieu, as I said earlier, is not perceiving you. So what you should be doing is you should be focusing on the tangible things. The things. There's a beautiful phrase in the Jewish culture which I've forgotten exactly now, but it's generally you should develop the things that you can take with you. So things like education, things like your personality, things like your resilience, and all these other things. Of course. It's quite obvious why the Jews developed that culture, because they had to keep moving.
Yeah,
but
transferable.
You know what they can really teach us? Exactly, it's got to be transferable.
Transferable skills.
So if you're not being perceived as you are in the community you're in, maybe you're in the wrong community. Maybe you need to move out of the house or move out of the suburb or whatever it is. Maybe there's just simply no need for the skills that you have at the moment. So you have to go and develop skills.
Maybe you don't have any skills, Maybe you actually haven't developed any skills. So you're now saying like, oh, well, like I was in the wrong environment. I needed to get out of the community and literally the house I was in, as well as I didn't have a tribe. So I didn't have a proper tribe. So when you say like, well, you're not even being perceived at all, it's true. Like, did I really want people to perceive me as a man, or did I just want to get attention at all? Right? I actually needed real, authentic appreciation and affection and attention from other people, and I wasn't getting it as I was. And I thought, well, I'm not getting it because I'm like just this ugly, sad girl. That's why I'm not getting it. Now, maybe that was because, well, an argument could be made, because I'm ugly. Because I'm sad and miserable and I'm not reaching out to anyone. I don't have the mental cognizance to get a job or to actually help myself. So but being a man wasn't going to see that, or being perceived as a man wasn't going to solve that. I still would have had the same difficulties, so I guess maybe that could be the argument for transition, right? Like, when is transition actually right or healthy for an adult to do? Like, do you have a stable job? Do you have, are you actually being perceived? Are you in the right environment and doing all the other things you need to do, but you just are having trouble with being perceived as in a certain sex role and everything else is going well. But if you were perceived as in a male role, then that would kind of complete the package, which is what I've heard is the thing that is the was the guidance for previously. And, it's interesting that, now GenSpect has kind of become this alternative to WPath. And the WPath is guidance. They were never supposed to be like the world authority, the be all and end all say on trans everything. They were just guidelines for a very small population that had no research at all done.
That's true.
And so I guess to tie it back to how we opened this, which was about, reading the GenSpect guidelines, they are just guidelines, right? And guidelines are even guardrails, like that term. They are guardrails. They're not saying like, don't look over the edge. Like if you're walking on like a suspension bridge or whatever, and there's guardrails, they're not saying don't look over the edge or don't cross the bridge or don't do anything, but you have these guardrails so you can walk along your path and find your way to the other side and find your way to your own destiny and values and meaning, safely. But they're not the be all and end all, because if you just stand there and just grip the guardrails as hard as you can, and put in too firm of boundaries, you're not actually going to move anywhere. You're not going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
So I guess that kind of sums up the point, at least that I was making, that you need to have enough boundaries in place that you're able to move freely and I guess be flexible and not have too many boundaries that inhibit that flexibility and fluidity,
I'm going to call it for us because we've been talking for a good hour and a half now. And Laura, I'm just going to repeat what you just said. The point is finding it to the other side. Having some kind of guidelines or guardrails is so important because the human species has such a massive capacity for emotions, for violence, for happiness, for all sorts of things, that taking some kind of heritage from our legacy, whichever that is, whichever cultural legacy it is or social legacy it is, and providing some kind of guideline, like you said, so that we can make it across to the other side. That's actually all this is about,
Journeying across
exactly the psyche.
The mind. Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Exactly. And I can say from a midlife perspective that the journey is definitely worth it. That when you get to a certain point in life where the onion layers, the layers of reality of what meaning is and what purpose is, they start coming off gradually over the decades. And when you're ready, they come off and you see the next layer and life becomes richer and deeper and more meaningful. So I want to just end this podcast and thank everyone for sticking with us for so long. It was quite an intense discussion. But Laura, I know you're doing it from not the best circumstances, but we're looking forward to different things for you this year, hey?
Yeah. I mean, I kind of, have been in a rough state the past, couple weeks. But I think it's a change of environment. I think that's going to help. And don't worry, because we'll definitely keep talking about intense stuff. Either way, as I like to say, the good funks and the bad funks. Yeah, I think it is worth it. Even though if you doubt it sometimes, you just need someone to come in and, I guess, guide you back in the right direction. Because usually when you're off, you might just be skewed a little bit. And it only takes a little bit of a skew to set you completely on the wrong path. So sometimes just having a proper guide to help skew you back on the right path so you can find your own journey and then help other people with their paths. So
thanks, Laura.
All right. Thanks, Vincent.